At the top of the towering mountain is the clan's temple, and at its foot is the city. From there, a huge lightning vortex emanates. The villagers notice that the Qiu Qian Sect is already one of the strongest sects in the world, and now their son is completing the body-forging stage. They note that it's not for nothing that he's been dubbed the strongest of all time. People can't believe that the main character actually decided to embark on ascension, despite the fact that he's been practicing for less than 20 years. At the top of the mountain where the protagonist is stationed, thunder and lightning rumbles at the place where he is conducting the cultivation process. The protagonist assumed a pose and closed his eyes to better focus on the cultivation process. The young man's body is enveloped in a magical aura, and his hands have a mysterious blue-purple covering. Suddenly, the temple building is struck by a powerful lightning strike, so strong that it shakes the mountain on which it sits. The protagonist accepts such a challenge of fate with a completely calm face and a cool head. Lightning discharges strike the temple building, and its walls shake from the lightning's devastating effect on it. The sanctuary is so strongly affected by electrical discharges that it even begins to emit rays of light. The protagonist calmly takes a breath, because the cultivation process has not yet ended, and the young man should still need strength to overcome the test. Another lightning strike hits the temple building and seeks to destroy it, but the shrine continues to stand untouched. The incredible lightning discharges are so powerful that they even prove to be capable of making grooves in the rock, however, without doing anything to the temple. Qiu Qian, with a smile on his face, meets all the hardships that his indomitable fate has prepared for him. He realizes that the heavenly forces are not even close to shaking his confidence yet. The ringing of the bell echoes throughout the neighborhood, and red-hot sparks fly from its surface in different directions. It is the 8th strike on the bell, but the protagonist does not even need to take any extra measures, as his small efforts are enough as it is. The protagonist lies on the floor, putting one leg over the other and putting his hands behind his head as the powerful fires close in on the young man. He wonders if people are going to make any effort to stop it. Qiu Qian is so unperturbed by the rolling thunder that he starts to lose interest in what's going on, so he starts yawning. The hero notices that the last bell strike is left, and if even the last lightning strike doesn't make his bell ring, the guy will be a little disappointed. The final 9th blow strikes the protagonist's bell tower so hard that it itself and the mountain beneath it are incredibly shaken. The young man lies absolutely motionless on his temple while powerful electric shocks strike his bell. The protagonist notices that the 9 lightning strikes of the lightning forging body has successfully completed, so he shrinks his shrine, so much so that it fits in his hand without any problem. The boy rises from the ground, warming up a bit after the ordeal. The hero declares that he has yet to undergo the tribulation of the 5 elements, so he should be a little more serious. No sooner does the protagonist finish his thought than suddenly another lightning bolt crashes into the rock. As the young man removes his protection, the natural disaster destroys the mountain, and shards of it fly in all directions. Residents of homes in the town at the foot of the mountain leaned out of their windows and wondered in horror why, after 9 lightning strikes forged the body, another one broke out. The girls can't believe that after 9 lightning strikes there was another one. Given the character of the protagonist, they assume that the young man has already removed his defenses. However, suddenly the mountain on which the hero has been practicing meditation begins to collapse, and the young man assumes that he will die. Qiu Qian, sinking further and further into the abyss of the unknown, cannot believe that he, being a great genius who was about to ascend to the world of the immortals, would perish in this way. The protagonist is perplexed, as he assumed that it was originally supposed to be over even after the 9th lightning bolt. Suddenly, a bright light appears on the path of the protagonist in the depths of the abyss, into which he was faithfully plunged. The guy is confronted by an unknown person who declares that there should have been 9 lightning strikes, but by his mistake there was another one. The young man becomes enraged at the fact that through the fault of some person he has ended up in an unknown place, and possibly even dead. The lad puts one hand forward and spreads all his fingers wide, thus as if preparing to call his weapon into them. However, the stranger tries to explain to the protagonist that all his attempts to use his power in this world will be in vain. The guy makes a swift dash towards his opponent and declares that he has not only cold weapons, but also simple physical strength. Qiu's hand darts around in every direction in an attempt to catch the stranger at least a little bit. But he never succeeds, so he starts to lose his temper. Eventually, the protagonist is exhausted and decides that chasing the elusive creature is a waste of his own strength. The silhouette offers the hero to surrender and informs him that he will make it up to him, as the guy was here through no fault of his own. The protagonist, still out of breath, is perplexed as to who the stranger could be that he is talking about such lofty things. A full-figured man appears before the main character, who is dressed in colorful shorts and a tight white t-shirt. The man's head is framed by a divine halo. The stranger tells him that in the hero's world, he went through a rite of elevation, as a result of which he became a god. The hero, being blinded by the bright glow that emanates from the deity, informs him that if the man was wrong, then let him bring the protagonist back to his world as an apology. God declares that the only thing he cannot do for the hero is to send the young man to his world, since the protagonist is already dead in it. The protagonist grabs the divine being by the breasts, and being furious at what he hears, declares that such an outcome is simply not possible. The man says that he understands the feelings of the protagonist, because if he were in the young man's place, he would be angry. The deity wonders if the protagonist would like to go to another world and have fun there. The protagonist continues to hold the man by his clothes, but now he is no longer screaming or arguing with him. Hundreds of memories from other worlds flash before his eyes. The young man becomes discouraged and sees no point in traveling to another dimension, because he has lost all his powers, which means that he can no longer resist his enemies there. The man wonders what the protagonist thinks about going to another world, with abilities that the god will graciously allow the guy to keep. The young man asks if he can choose his own new world. The divine creature does a snap of his fingers. Suddenly, the protagonist's face changes and takes on a frightened look, as if his heart is literally going into the heels of his head. The man finally informs that the protagonist has nothing to worry about, because he has already found a suitable world for the guy, which should be to his liking. The earth really does seem to leave the main character's feet, and he finds himself in free flight, leaving God and the heavens behind him, while emitting screams of terror. Only seconds remain before the earth collides with the protagonist, but the guy doesn't even have time to realize what's happening, which directly reflects his surprised expression on his face. After managing to regroup in the air, the protagonist successfully lands on the ground in the new world. Right in front of him stands a huge, enraged deer on two legs. The protagonist looks around to better assess the situation he is in. Behind him, he discovers a village defended by its inhabitants from an attack by a beast. Suddenly, the palm of the protagonist's hand begins to spew sparks and glow with a purple glow. A blade appears in the hands of the protagonist. The young man concludes that the old man really did not deceive him about the fact that the hero's powers remained with him. It seems to the hero that something interesting is happening in this world. A beast of colossal size decides to strike a crushing blow directly at the protagonist, and does it so hard that the ground under his fist begins to collapse. However, the hero doesn't care about the enemy's attack, and he, being absolutely unharmed, rises into the air, going to use the 1,000 swords of the broken moon technique. At that moment, a circle-shaped blade is etched behind the young man. In a moment, the enemy is cut by dozens of blades of the protagonist, and from his deep cuts, meanwhile, thick, dark red blood is pouring out at full speed. Having effortlessly defeated his opponent, the protagonist starts moving towards the village, but the civilians appear to have a double impression of the young man. A man holding a pitchfork in hands, trembling with fear, wonders if the protagonist is a witch. He explains that even if it's true, the villagers still can't repay him. The protagonist realizes that the civilians treat him with some degree of distrust or apprehension, so he hides his weapon behind his back. The young man declares that witch doctor sounds pretty cool, but he doesn't know, so he asks the inhabitants about its meaning. Witchers are professional monster hunters. They are usually clad in sturdy armor and armed with deadly weapons that help them deal with their enemies. From childhood, monster hunters are mutated to gain superhuman abilities that will help them deal with monsters more effectively in the future. Witches are engaged in leading an itinerant lifestyle, earning money by accepting hunting orders from ordinary people. After killing an enemy, they are rewarded accordingly. The protagonist believes that the life and work of a witch must be very exciting. Standing in front of a bulletin board, the young man decides to pick up the first wanted poster he comes across. The guy tears the wanted poster off the bulletin board, but someone else also claims to have it. The stranger's hand pulls at the other end of the sheet in such a way that it almost rips off. The girl pulls the sheet and declares that the order the protagonist is going to take is beyond the power of ordinary people like him. So if he still tries, he will certainly die. The protagonist has to forcefully pull a wanted poster to get what he wants. The young man declares that he is a witch, which is why he has to choose the best orders, The stranger begins to rage furiously because the hero dares to speak out in her presence, which becomes very noticeable by her trembling limbs. Qiu Qian fears that the girl is about to cry because the guy took the flyer from her. So to comfort her, the protagonist suggests the stranger take the poster. The girl declares that she will not allow the protagonist to defame the word. With these words, the fiery stranger lunges forward with her sword, but the hero, fortunately, manages to dodge her. The protagonist gently grabs the tip of the girl's blade and wonders what it was that infuriated the stranger so much. The fact that he called himself a witch, or the fact that he dared to call himself a better one. The girl demands that the protagonist stop pretending that he is a hunter of monsters, because the stranger will never believe that the guy is a witch. She tries to pull the sword, but she fails, and she asks the hero to let her go. With a deft movement of his hands, the young man knocks the weapon out of the stranger's hands, so that his blade bends and her blade goes into free flight. Qiu Qian declares that winners are not judged. The young man offers to stage a witchery-style duel in case the girl doesn't take the protagonist at his word. At this moment, she watches mesmerized as her sword flies upward. The witch girl agrees to duel with the protagonist without a second thought, but her face shows that she feels quite timid and insecure. Suddenly, the blade of the stranger, which had time to describe in the air a few pirouettes, stabs precisely into the scabbard that is behind the back of the heroine. The witcher is genuinely surprised how the hero so accurately calculated the trajectory of the sword's fall. Suddenly, the young man decides to retreat, as he sees no point in arguing with the stranger. He declares that he can neither write nor read, so he asks the heroine to accompany him. The girl is perplexed by how the protagonist can behave so brazenly, and declares that if she wins, the entire award will go exclusively to her. She claims that she will never lose to an illiterate imposter. Meanwhile, the young man has already moved on. Meanwhile, evening had fallen in a certain village. The settlement is divided into two parts by a small river running through it, over which a bridge has been thrown to connect the parts of the village. On one side of the river is a campfire, and on the other side are thatched houses and a church. Two men whisper that the wife of the man sitting behind them has disappeared without a trace right by the river not long ago. The second man confirms and states that according to eyewitnesses, there was a horrible sight on the bank. The scene of the disappearance looked as if the woman had been dragged underwater alive. Clothes were scattered everywhere, as the victim was probably washing clothes at that moment. In addition, there were traces of blood everywhere, which went into the water. Rumor has it that all that is left of the missing girl is a piece of her clothing. At this moment, the husband of the missing woman sits with a piece of bloody cloth and mourns for his wife. Behind him is a church. The grieving man is called out by a woman's voice and turns back. The girl wonders if the man is the one who placed the order that is in the witch's hand on the wanted board. Behind the stranger stand the protagonist and his companion. The desperate man declares that he has nothing more to add, and everything he knows is written in the scroll held by the heroine. The girl asks that the man take them to the place where the missing incident occurred. The witcher confidently declares that no matter how strong the monster is, however, the hunters will surely deal with it. The girl whisperingly tells the protagonist that she doesn't understand why the guy is pretending to be an imposter, because he has no right to call himself a witch. The guy asks the girl not to overreact to what the people in the village are saying, in front of a man who is about to go in search of his missing wife. There's an old man who declares that he will never allow him to do such a stupid thing, because it is a very dangerous idea. The unfortunate man admits that he is unable to stand up to the monsters on his own, so he was forced to ask the witches for help. The protagonist greets the elderly man and shows his openness, while the girl behaves quite reserved and modestly. The old man suddenly grabs the man who has lost his wife, and wonders if he has gone mad since he decided to bring inhuman, vicious, and ungrateful witches here. Life has brought the victimized man many difficult hardships and psychological trials, so feeling extremely depressed, he declares that he is not in any way crazy. He just has nothing to lose now. Obsessed with revenge, the man states that he is now driven only by the desire to avenge his late wife. He wants the monsters to pay for the murder with their blood. The villagers are whispering among themselves. They assume that the newcomers are witches, as they are dressed very similarly to them. He walks down a street full of people who claim that the coming of witches will not be good. Qiu Qian notices that the people here are not particularly friendly to hunters like him. The protagonist asks his companion why people insult witches. After all, Monster hunters are supposed to protect ordinary people from evil. The girl thinks that since the hero doesn't know anything about it, he is definitely not a witch doctor. The hero's companion recognizes that the villagers are indeed right about something. Lavushka explains that, after going through the process of becoming a witch, in a way, they really are no longer human beings. The protagonist states that no matter who witches become in the process of becoming, they still deserve to be treated better by people. Witches, in the young man's opinion, should be respected by people. The girl is a little confused by the fact that the protagonist, unlike the vast majority, treats the heroine with understanding and recognizes the merits of witches. However, the main character made this compliment completely unintentionally, but the girl hoped for something more, so she got confused, from which she completely forgot that they had things to do. Almost arriving on the scene, the man states that the place where the incident took place is a little further away. Since there is little to see at night, he suggests that the witches wait for him at the site. The protagonist's companion objects, saying that real witches have excellent night vision. The girl claims that the guy is an imposter, so he does not possess such abilities. Suddenly, the hero's hair is lifted up, and a glowing diamond-shaped mark appears on his forehead. The young man states that he didn't hear what the girl was saying, and wonders if she can repeat what he is about to do. The protagonist raises his hand, pointing upward with his index and middle fingers, after which a huge magical blob of energy explodes into the air, emitting light. The shockwave spreads in all directions, creating a dust cloud. With the help of her inhuman abilities, the girl manages to see the monster's footprints on the ground. Based on their appearance, the protagonist's companion concludes that the victim was dragged somewhere. In addition, the witch girl discovers a viscous green substance on the ground, which she applies to her finger to sniff. She declares that she smells the putrid odor of a herbivorous monster. The girl informs him that according to her data, the smell is coming from the river. The protagonist cannot understand how his companion managed to find out the direction of the smell so quickly. At the same time, the young man starts casting some kind of spell. The protagonist spreads his arms wide to use another technique in his arsenal, resulting in fiery swirls and strong wind currents. The girl concludes that they have to deal with a water ghost, which is similar in appearance to an amphibian man. It has fins all over its body, webbing between its fingers and gills. The protagonist in turn assumes that their adversary is a water spirit, which is embodied in a charming girl who is actually a bloodthirsty killer. Suddenly, a sound comes to the companion of the protagonist. Only she can hear it, because ordinary people cannot hear some sounds. But witches, due to their peculiarities, can do so. The protagonist uses his pure wind technique accordingly, which creates a magical silhouette of some deity above him that helps the young man better hear what is happening. Suddenly, the water in the river splashes, creating waves, and the splashes go flying in all directions. Suddenly, an underwater monster appears out of the water, the description of which coincides exactly with the one the main character's companion saw in her imagination, and jumps out at the heroine. The underwater killer is stopped by the protagonist, who realized in time how to act in this situation, and pierced the monster with a fiery arrow right in the thigh. Under the effect of his technique, the young man begins to float in the air. Qiu Qian is surrounded by a fiery hurrah, and behind him in a circle are swords. The hero's companion can't believe it, so she wonders if the hero is a mage just in case. The sea monster, however, is not seriously injured, so it successfully lands on the ground with such tremendous force that it breaks beneath him. The girl, clonking in time, declares that one attack will not be enough to kill the sea spirit. While the witch girl fights the enemy, the protagonist watches what is happening and does nothing. The guy's companion declares that such wounds will do nothing to the monster, as it is necessary to cut off the ears to drain all the slime out of them. The hero is concentrating on watching the battle between his colleague and the sea monster to carefully analyze the situation and develop a battle strategy, so he asks not to rush him. The protagonist uses his technique, as a result of which the enemy is thrown high up, and some unknown force tears him into small pieces. The young man now has every reason to believe that the monster is dead. Something so strongly shocked the main character's companion that the girl looks away disconsolately. Her face is full of horror and absolute incomprehension. Underwater monsters come out of the water and surround the girl. The monsters become too many, and the hero's companion, of course, notices it. But all she can do in this situation is to get into a protective stance. The protagonist doesn't waste a second, and immediately orienting himself, makes a vertical arm swing that applies his technique to the monsters, resulting in him launching his clinics at the opponents. Behind the girl, a huge fire vortex develops, which, like a meat grinder, washes over dozens of amphibian people, making the tornado take on a bardic hue. The girl just doesn't move. All that remains of the underwater monsters are the fins thrown out by the whirlwind, which fly in all directions. The main character's companion wonders who the guy is, because warriors with such great power are quite rare. The young man recalls that earlier he had already said that he was a witch. In addition, Qiu Qian remarks that he was the winner in their argument. The girl agrees with the victory of the protagonist, and as if casually wonders if the guy could teach her the technique with which he won the victory. The protagonist replies that unfortunately he cannot teach the girl. He explains that he would not refuse an apprentice who would inherit his skill. But in this world he feels the presence of spiritual power. The protagonist's companion is already starting to get frustrated that her training in the techniques is impossible. And after all, she was really hoping to master these powerful techniques. The hero still decides to look at the girl more closely, as in fact, witches have excellent potential for becoming immortal masters. Suddenly the protagonist notices in his companion a spiritual power within her body. However, the guy is perplexed as to how it can be in a girl's body and yet not be felt by him in the rest of the world. Qiu Qian notices that the color and arrangement of the spiritual forces are very different from his world. The girl, in the guy's opinion, is something similar to the dark cultivators. The hero declares that this world is much more interesting than it originally seemed to him. The young man finally declares that he can teach the girl true swordsmanship, but warns her that she will have to work hard to do so. This raises the question of whether the girl needs it at all. The hero declares that she is already able to defend herself in this world. The girl declares that her powers are not enough, as her goal is to eradicate hatred and disgust towards witches. And for that, she needs to become much stronger than she is now. The protagonist notices that the girl has great ambitions. The guy wonders if his companion is going to create a sect of witches. The girl declares that she doesn't know what a cult is, but it doesn't matter, as she believes she has grasped the basic idea anyway. The hero's companion reminds her how people treat people like her. The witcher states that she would like to create a place where witches will not suffer prejudice, hatred, and slander. She wants to get witches recognized around the world. In addition, the girl wants the mass persecution and brutal murders of witches to stop. The girl, however, being downcast and disillusioned, reports that she is too weak to realize her dream, too far from achieving it with her current strength. The protagonist tries to instill some hope in his companion by saying that perhaps achieving what the girl longs for, and what she has made the goal of her life, is not so impossible. The hero introduces himself as Qiu Qian, and suggests that the heroine follow him and tell him more about witches while he is still interested. The girl, in turn, introduces herself, calling herself Danielle Klind, from Fox School. The young man claims that the girl has a name that is too long for him to memorize. The hero's companion suggests that in this case, she should just call her Daniela. Someone contemplates in a magic ball the reflection of the protagonist, who is traveling with his companion. A voice summarizes that there is a witch doctor in the neighborhood, who suddenly descended from the sky and easily dispatched the ancient spirit of the deer. It turns out that the orb of divination was held by a girl with long brown hair and a purple dress, who is sprawled loosely on a huge throne. The stranger declares that she has never met such a witch, at least certainly not slept with one. A red-headed girl with long ears like an elf asks a lusty girl not to spread details about her personal life. Instead, she asks Jessica to realize that even if they wanted to deal with the ancient spirit of the deer, they would have to send 4 to 5 of the best mages out there. The redhead states that they need to make sure the main character isn't from a celestial fusion, because if he turns out to be from another world, they're going to have a lot of problems on their hands. On the other side of the table, a female voice is heard stating that the protagonist is a nuisance to them all and offers her own solution to the problem. The girl declares that since the young man is such a pain in the ass, she will just kill him. The author of such statements is a woman with ashy hair and a glass of wine in her hands, the icy Tanika Fiore. The protagonist's companion explains that the Duchy of Shell is quite small. However, the city of Shell is the capital of the duchy and the busiest place in the north of the western coastline. The protagonist notices that his assumptions about spiritual power are correct. No one here has spiritual powers, which means that either the young man's companion is so special, or all witches are witches. Danielle wonders menacingly if the protagonist is even listening to her. as it seems to her that he is not interested in what she is telling him. To lighten the mood, the boy asks what the name of the town of Shell is in their language. The hero's companion indignantly informs him that Shell means shells in their language. The girl recalls that she had already spoken about it when they first arrived in the city. Qiu Qian picks up a huge seashell from the counter and wonders what the purpose of their visit to the city is after all. The girl literally shows an empty wallet with not a penny in it and states that they came to town to make money. Danielle declares that she is not like the protagonist to just sit in a strange pose and not want to eat or drink. The hero tries to remember when he took any unusual poses that could cause such a resonance in a girl, but only his pose during the meditation process comes to mind. Suddenly, a powerful tsunami hits the shore of the town of Shell, destroying and washing away everything in its path. People are desperate to escape the impending disaster. The girl, not even having time to fully understand what is happening, and where did such a quantity of water come from, hears a whistling sound, and turning around, does not find the protagonist in his former place. The young man is pushed off the ground with a mighty push and soars high up. So high that he can see the tops of buildings and the way the water fills the streets of the city. The protagonist makes the usual hand gesture, which means that he is going to use one of the techniques of his arsenal. The young man watches what is going on below and thinks about his decision at the same time. In front of the guy appear several sea monsters, which the young man has met before, when he fulfilled the order of a man whose wife has gone missing. The bloodthirsty killers are armed with cold weapons. The main character's companion explains that the creatures in front of the main character are called murlocs. The girl says that usually they do not come ashore, but if they come out of the water, it is sure to portend trouble. The young man declares that since the situation requires immediate action, the hero decides to launch an attack with his 12-sword technique, rising into the air and summoning blades. The protagonist's companion declares that an ordinary sword won't even scratch a murloc, so to fight it, it is necessary to use the oil of a corpse-eater, which must be coated on the blade, which the girl does. The protagonist assures the girl that such measures are not necessary, as the young man's sword is not quite ordinary. With these words, the army of sea ghouls is skillfully cut into pieces by the protagonist, who promptly breaks through the water column and has no problem dealing with his opponents. The blade of the protagonist seamlessly cuts through the bodies of enemies so, coming at them like a knife through butter, that they are left only fins and other remains of their limbs. Danielle wonders how the protagonist managed to achieve such a mind-blowing effect, because according to her idea, the guy's sword should have rusted and crumbled after the first murloc, and she managed to kill them all. The protagonist smugly apologizes for being so strong, making a hand gesture that returns his blade to its rightful place, leaving a magical blue trail behind him. The guy declares that the girl shouldn't thank the protagonist, as he is sure that deep down she is very grateful to him. Suddenly, the face of the protagonist's companion changes its expression to a greatly frightened one, as if she had seen something that struck her to the core of her being. The protagonist and his companion are met by a whole army of soldiers, who are clad in armor and armed with spears and shields, on which, as well as on the clothes, engraved with the emblem of the cross. The protagonist is cautiously curious about what the military needs from him and his companion. The first of the soldiers decides to speak as a bearded man who appears to be the commander. He introduces himself as Clifford. The commander states that his duty is to protect the Prince of Questmoreland. Meanwhile, Daniel explains to the protagonist in a whisper, so as not to create misunderstandings on the part of the soldiers, that the man the commander is talking about is the ruler of the area. The protagonist declares that whoever the people who came here are, whether they are great generals or royal guards, it doesn't matter, because he won't remember their names. The young man realizes that they didn't come here just to show off their titles, so he inquires about the true purpose of the soldier's visit. The commander assumes that the hero is not local, and therefore not familiar with the local laws. The man explains that, technically, the use of spells, sorcery, and other forms of the supernatural is forbidden in the territory of the Duchy of Shell. The main character cannot believe that there is any law that could prohibit the use of all kinds of magic or sorcery. However, despite all of the above, the military man has to admit that Shell is only a small duchy without much military power, so it will not be able to oppose the protagonist, especially when he demonstrated his impressive skills. The commander states that the ruler has a request for the protagonist. Since His Majesty is in trouble, Shell would be immensely grateful if the boy would help him with the matter. The protagonist's companion immediately grabs the young man by the fabric of his garment like a small child, and begins to say tediously that soldiers provide an opportunity to earn money, which should not be missed. The protagonist incomprehensibly spreads his hands, as if hinting to the girl that he has no information about the award, so he can't guarantee that something worthy can come out of it. The main character's companion shakes pitifully an empty bag that could contain money. But so far it is empty, which the girl is so very disappointed about. The commander coughs a bit rather to draw the attention of the travelers, and declares that the reward the heroes will receive for completing the task will be worthy, corresponding to the national importance of the mission. Eventually, the protagonist agrees to the commander's proposal and asks to take himself and his traveling companion to His Majesty. Daniel is incredibly happy about this fact. The protagonist, his companion and commander, all together keep the way to the end of the street, in the distance of which can be seen the royal castle, which travelers are going to go to. On the way to the king's castle, the commander tells about His Majesty's only son, Gribble. The military man explains that since childhood the boy has been sick with a strange disease. During the day, the young heir was exhausted and could not even get out of his bed, thus spending the days away in the captivity of his own bed, which was very comfortable and beautiful, as befitted a royal family. Because the prince was bedridden by his illness, he was unable to function on his own, so a vast number of servants were called upon to facilitate the lord's existence. Gribble is His Majesty's only son, so he would never give up caring for his firstborn son. But illness was not the only problem the royal family had to face. Everyone who remained to watch over the young lord at night found himself murdered in the morning, such as the poor maid whose breathless, bloody body lay on the floor of the prince's room. His Majesty's brat himself sleeps innocently, as if he is not the one committing brutal murders every night, but as if someone else is. The lord has long blonde hair. His hands are not so clean, however, as they are covered in the victim's blood. The commander solemnly announces that the protagonist and his companion have finally arrived at the place. The royal palace, with its entrance gate, above which the unicorn family crest is depicted, stands majestically before them. The protagonist and his girlfriend are not going to lose a second of their allotted time, so they are immediately going to go deep into the castle through the entrance gate, but they are stopped by the commander. The girl does not understand what kind of urgent need appeared to the military man, that for the umpteenth time he stops the heroes from going directly to the castle. The commander explains that entry to the palace is only allowed without weapons, so they will be kept by the guards for the duration of the heroes' stay in the palace. The man promises that the weapons will be returned safe and sound upon their return. The companion of the main character pulls out her huge sword and presses it tightly against her body, as the girl treats strangers with a certain degree of distrust, so she does not want to give them such a personal thing as a weapon. The protagonist, with a deft movement of his hand, creates a magical lasso, which immediately snatches the weapon of his companion, which was right in her chest. Everyone around, especially Danielle herself, is simply bewildered by what is happening. Qiu Qian finishes the action of the technique, wondering if the commander is comfortable with this turn of events, and demands that he and his companion finally be taken to His Majesty's side. The commander and all the soldiers are in a state of some misunderstanding towards the hero. In addition, they do not quite understand how he manages to use magic techniques of such a high level. The commander removes his metal helmet and places it in his hands. The man removes his helmet and asks to be allowed to introduce himself again. He states that he is the ruler of the Duchy of Shell, Westmoreland. The sovereign asks the heroes to rescue his son. The protagonist asks that he and his companion be taken to a young gentleman's house. A young man and a girl find themselves in the royal chambers of the crown prince. The boy is seated on a huge bed. The room is made in golden light colors and is well illuminated. The protagonist wonders if the girl can say anything about the young gentleman's condition at the moment. The companion of the protagonist states that for the time being, she cannot make any hasty conclusions, as it would be more correct to wait for the night to study the young man's behavior in more detail. The girl declares that she and the hero will stay the night with the prince, and asks His Majesty to bring food here, and to block all entrances. The sovereign is genuinely surprised, as he assumes that terrible things could happen to them. However, the ruler eventually agrees to commend the heroes to stay with the prince for the night. A smirk appears on his face, which indicates that the ruler is up to something wrong. After a while, the night darkness enveloped the huge royal palace. The palace building consists of several interconnected Baroque structures. In one of the windows that leads into the young gentleman's room, the protagonist can be seen seated in an armchair while his companion eagerly eats a meal. The protagonist is dutifully practicing meditation with his eyes closed to focus, while the girl sits right in front of him eating dinner. Suddenly, the crown prince reveals his red eyes, which are full of anger and rage, and grinds his teeth at the uninvited guests in the form of the protagonist and his companion. The young man, being perfectly calm, observes that the young gentleman has finally awakened from his sleep. A huge creature with the body of a man and the head of a wolf appears before the heroes. Danielle immediately realizes that their opponent will be a werewolf. The protagonist begins to prepare for the attack. His face is covered with a mysterious pattern. The guy concludes that everything is simple enough. The werewolf ate the general's son and took his place. A huge monster pounces on the protagonist, and the latter, although behaving calmly enough, is about to attack him. Daniel reminds him that he is still the duke's son, so he must not be killed. The werewolf delivers a crushing blow right where the heroes were before, however. Both Qiu Qian and his companion both successfully dodge the attack. The protagonist notices that to defeat the enemy is a difficult task, so he decides to change the strategy a bit. The prince finds himself restrained by the main character's chains all over his body, in such a way that they completely immobilize him and prevent him from making any extra movements. The young man's companion is sincerely surprised by the fact that, for the hero to deal with such a strong opponent is a trifling problem. While the rival behind the protagonist is trying to get out of the shackles that securely imprisoned him, the guy asks the girl to tell more about this phenomenon. The hero's companion explains that werewolves are people who suffer from a form of body alteration. This disease can be hereditary or the result of a curse, as in this case. While the protagonist is playing with the werewolf as if it were a pet, his companion is watching the comicality of what is happening with incomprehension. The young man wonders what they should do next. Daniel declares that there are 4 ways, each of which can help the sick person to be cured of the disease. The first way is a shirt made of 5 parsley leaves, which the prince will have to wear at night, but it is unlikely to be found in the north. The essence of the second method is to give the werewolf a potion made from the tears of a virgin. However, such a potion can only be prepared by an experienced alchemist, none of whom the girl has ever met before. The third method involves a person who is sincerely in love with the werewolf. If the werewolf sincerely reciprocates in the first 7 days after learning that someone loves him, he will be cured of the disease. The protagonist states that his beloved died the first night after the prince fell ill. Where the young man comes from, 7 days would have passed long ago. Danielle informs him that only one last method remains, which is to find the object that was used to put the curse on the young lord. Of all the options listed by the girl, the hero decides to choose the one in which it is necessary to find the owner of the cursed object. The first thing the young man wonders is who would benefit from turning the duke's son into a werewolf. The answer is not long in coming. Anyone could have done it. Meanwhile, the next morning outside the royal palace. The morning sunlight illuminates the pre-palace garden. The protagonist and the girl leave the young prince's private quarters. His Majesty, being intrigued, welcomes the travelers and first of all wonders if they have managed to find out anything. The girl explains that the prince is cursed, so regardless of the full moon, he turns into a werewolf every night. His instincts overpower him, and he attacks everyone he comes across. The father wonders if there are any ways to rid his son of the curse, because since the heroes are the only ones who survived the night with the prince, they must have ideas. The protagonist opens the door to the lord's chamber, thereby inviting His Majesty to enter the room. Guy explains that the first thing to do is to figure out exactly who cursed the young prince. He explains that this is called unringing the bell. The sovereign notes that the metaphor is indeed apt. He can't imagine anyone hurting his boy, for Gribble has always been honest and friendly. There is an awkward silence between the heroes and His Majesty, as based on experience, the Duke's son showed himself last night in a less than friendly manner. The ruler claims to be honest as well as his son, but he does have a few haters, which is not surprising at all, because any ruler has a couple of enemies. Daniel asks the sovereign to give the names of all alleged political opponents, as this could be very important. However, the hero interrupts the girl, stating that he does not agree with their approach, so he puts forward his own proposal. The young man suggests that the sovereign be a little more cheerful for a few days, and if anyone asks why he is so happy, let him answer that he hired a good witch doctor, and a witch doctor experienced enough to easily solve all of his own son's problems. And then, the hero continues, he will simply wait until the one who cursed the prince himself comes into his arms, pointing a finger at himself. The girl recognizes that the hero's plan is appropriate, but reminds him that the curse will not be lifted by simply killing the enemy. The protagonist hesitantly states that of course he remembered this little nuance. The guy asks the sovereign to start pretending to be joyful from now on. The girl accepts the hero's plan, so she asks the ruler to try as hard as he can. The Duke rejoices that if the hero's plan works, his little Gribble will finally be cured of his illness. Danielle notes that not only will the prince heal physically, but he will also lose his memory of those moments when he was not himself. The protagonist confirms that this is very important to the young gentleman. The sovereign realizes that the fact that the prince will not retain memories of the murders will contribute to his psychological health. Then he will be a sweet and cheerful prince again. His Majesty declares that just the mere thought that his son might recover already makes his troubled days much less gray. The protagonist and his companion do not spend the next day training in the courtyard of the castle. The protagonist wraps his arms around his partner and tells her that the girl should feel the spiritual energy Qi flowing in her dantian. Daniel doesn't know all the concepts yet, so he asks the young man what a dantian is. The guy explains that the so-called dantian is located slightly below the girl's navel and points to the specific location with his hand. The girl, in order to take a short break, lies flat on the ground. The hero's companion wonders whether the man who cursed the prince will show up at all. The hero assures her that if he is in his right mind, he will definitely show up. The apprentice assumes it's just the opposite, because if the enemy shows up, she'll earn herself some trouble. The character states that if he were a sincere ally of the Duke, he would quite possibly think so too. However, he is simply a witch doctor who works for a fee. The young man believes that in the eyes of the enemy, they are only mercenaries who don't have to fight at all. At least many would think so. Suddenly, a piece of wall breaks through, and the protagonist concludes that the suspect is about to reveal himself. Suddenly, the body of a dead soldier, apparently massacred by the perpetrator, falls out from behind the wall. When the person who is supposedly the culprit enters the castle grounds, the protagonist already meets the one ready to attack. The unknown man asks not to kill him, as he has come to make a deal. The criminal states that he knows the Duke is only pretending to be happy to trap him. The unknown hooded man claims to be willing to offer much more than the Duke. The hero, in turn, will have to leave the werewolf alone. The protagonist demands that the stranger first let him know who he's talking to, so the guy does a handwave to drop the veil of secrecy from him. The stranger's cloak is lifted into the air by the protagonist's power, and none other than the young gentleman appears before him. The companion of the protagonist is in complete bewilderment at what is happening, as she cannot believe that all the time the solution was right under her nose. Qiu Qian also realizes that the Duke's son, whom he already knows, is in front of him. The young prince apologizes for presenting himself so late. He declares that his name is Gribble, and also admits that he turned himself into a werewolf. The protagonist wonders how he should understand the fact that the young man turned himself into a monster. The Duke's son claims it's quite simple. He actually cursed himself, after which he became a werewolf. The protagonist assumed that normal people don't turn themselves into werewolves, but this incident destroyed all prejudices. The hero's companion does not understand why Gribble decided to turn into a werewolf. After all, due to the prince's fault, many innocent people died. In addition, those close to the young gentleman were among the dead. The light illuminates the guy in such a way that one side is illuminated while the other remains in shadow, thus emphasizing his ambiguous personality. The prince demands the witches stop immediately. He wonders if they want to leave here with a good reward or waste their time with idle chatter about his motives. The protagonist declares that he will capture the young gentleman first, and then he will decide what to do with him next. Iron shackles rattle their links and are about to shackle the Duke's son, who did not expect such a turn of events. The Duke's son successfully dodges the protagonist's attack while performing a spectacular backward pass on his hands. The prince can't believe that the main character decided that he would fall for the same trick twice. The hero explains that the prince has just revealed that he retains memories of those moments when he was a werewolf. In addition, the hero Qiu Qian demands the enemy not to underestimate him. An expression full of fear and misunderstanding settled on the young gentleman's face. The protagonist has no problem managing to shackle the young prince in iron chains, thereby completely immobilizing him. Qiu Qian is sure that since the young man has cursed himself, he must know how to break the curse. The hero sees no reason not to dig into his soul and find out more about it. However, the hero thinks back in time, as he assumes that such a powerful technique can bring the prince to the state of a vegetable, or even kill him. You can't kill His Majesty's son after all. In this case, the protagonist decides to use the technique of ghost sleep, which will probably help to see the key to solving this case. Before the eyes of His Majesty's son appears the main character's hand. which concentrates some magical energy around, while plunging the young man into sleep. In a ghostly dream, the protagonist may contemplate a young girl sitting on a couch with her arms crossed. The girl demands that the prince stop pestering her, as she is not interested in humans, due to the fact that they have too short a lifespan. The stranger reminds him that the young man already has a lover. The duke's son, kneeling with a bouquet of flowers, declares that he is willing to do anything for a girl. The blue-haired girl asks the young master to stop because it sounds quite disgusting to her. She is sure that the young man said the same thing to that poor girl as well. The young prince can't find the right words, so he just mumbles something under his breath. The girl declares that she is tired of listening to useless flattery from the young master, so she decides to send the young man back. The prince's sleeping lover declares that he is so ugly he's not even a werewolf. Through his sleep, the young gentleman hears what the girl says about him. He can't believe he's uglier than some werewolf. The boy concludes that she aesthetically likes werewolves better. The protagonist does not understand whether the young gentleman has a hearing problem, or whether he is really that stupid. It seems to him that even a half-asleep man could understand the meaning of the girl's words. At that moment, His Majesty bursts into the courtyard of the castle, and the first thing he sees is his own son chained in iron chains. The protagonist in this one is fully involved in the process of using the technique by which he penetrates the young man's mind. He proposes to the sovereign to see for himself. In Gribble's flashback, the guy has drawn an infernal pentagram on the floor, in the center of which he pours blood from a cut on the palm of his hand as part of the ritual. A young gentleman, transformed into a werewolf, in a fit of rage remarks that he has inadvertently killed a servant girl. The duke's son believes he has no choice but to prod to kill people and pretend to be sick anymore. The prince is convinced that the average person will never guess that something is wrong with him. And if some experts show up, they will decide that the young man is cursed, set on a slippery slope of murder and hatred. The young heir declares that he will find his beloved very soon. She just has to wait for him. The protagonist notices that, however, the young gentleman does not have a fraction of the friendliness and modesty that His Highness had spoken of in him. Qiu Qian and his companion are about to leave and declare that they are leaving the prince, not his father. Now the latter can do whatever he wants with him. His Majesty tries to stop the protagonist and his companion by reminding them that they are witches and hunt monsters. The protagonist and the girl turn around, signaling their willingness to listen attentively to the ruler. The sovereign is tearfully forced to admit that the witches must do their duty and deal with the murderous werewolf and save his son. The protagonist makes a sharp and precise sweep of his hand, as if to replicate the motion that a sword blade would make, and leave a magical mark. The young lord's severed head falls a few meters away from his body, which falls breathlessly to its knees. An engraved plaque can be seen on a wooden pole. Behind the roadside sign is a huge building. There is a huge concentration of people inside the establishment. In the bar, the most diverse segments of the population have gathered. Spectators watch the dance of charming girls. People are drinking, eating, and having a good time, while the protagonist and his companion are seated at one of the tables to also have a little snack and regain their strength. The protagonist inquires about the future plans of his companion. She, in turn, is engrossed in drinking and eating. The girl takes a little sip of her wine and declares that when they take a little break, they should look at some more orders. The young man advises his companion to reconsider thinking so narrowly and reminds the girl that her ultimate goal is not to enrich herself. The girl objects that, however, her goal still requires impressive finances. The main character argues that there are always things that are more valuable than money, take that werewolf's technique at least. Daniel is extremely one-sided in stating that he is not going to learn the technique that the young prince used, as it has caused the deaths of many people. Qiu Qian suggests that the girl listen to an entertaining story. The hero begins his story by saying that in the long past, there was a sect called the Blood Cloaks. They were dark cultists who used human blood to increase their powers. At their core, they were a very dark, violent organization that were in the business of killing civilians. The protagonist explains that members of this bloodthirsty sect imbibed their victims to drink their blood to increase their power. Danielle reports that in her world, the creatures described by the hero are called vampires. The young man declares that their name doesn't matter. In any case, they have taken many lives. The protagonist states that he killed them all with his sword. He wanted to erase all traces of their existence, so he decided to burn down the sect. However, the brother of the protagonist still managed to save the books of the sect, among which was the one that contained a description of the technique of blood-sucking. The hero says that when he saw the book, he immediately thought of those poor people whose lives had been cruelly taken away. He was consumed with blind rage, so he decided to destroy it. However, the protagonist's brother tried to stop him. He was firmly convinced that knowledge contained neither good nor evil, as everything depended on those in whose hands it would fall. For several months, the hero's brother diligently studied the rescued manuscripts, which, according to the former, contained a lot of useful information. Later, the hero's brother, based on his knowledge, hypothesized that people have several types of blood. His knowledge subsequently helped him save countless lives through blood transfusions. The hero is sure that if the girl learns this technique well, she might understand how to effectively fight this type of curse, which could eventually help not only her, but a lot of other witches as well. The girl liked the inspiring story of the main character, so she expresses an irresistible desire to start training. The protagonist declares that it's not a good time to exercise, as it's late and the sun has long since set, so she better go to bed now. Meanwhile, the next day, in a sun-filled forest, the protagonist states that the memories obtained through the ghost sleep technique were rather limited, so it was only possible to figure out who the prince was in love with. The young man informs her that as far as he knows, the lair is located in this place. The girl states that it is rumored that demonic spirits congregate here during the day, so perhaps coming at night would be a ray of ideas. Qiu Qian firmly believed that the opponents would not cause them any trouble, because in his opinion, there was no problem that could not be solved with a sword. The protagonist is reached by a sudden noise behind him, so he turns around to see what's going on there. Raising his head to the top, the protagonist notices that he is surrounded by a huge number of spirits, which are externally identical to skeletons. The protagonist's companion states that the spirits take on different guises and observes that their movements are like a dance, and they twirl in it. Qiu Qian confidently reminds the girl of what he said earlier about how any problem can be solved with a sword. The young man uses his weapon to take out all of his opponents at once. Daniel warns the protagonist to look the other way, as a new danger has formed there. The guy makes a gesture with his hand, and one of his blades immediately rushes in the direction the protagonist indicated. However, the protagonist's sword meets resistance in its path, in the form of a petrified body, which throws the young man's blade aside. The protagonist is shocked when he looks around and comes to the realization of what has become an obstacle to his sword. In front of him, the guy contemplates a huge stone giant that is awakening from sleep. His eyes light up with orange light, and the runes on his body begin to glow. On the hero's question, "What is this mysterious creature?" the girl replies that before them is a magical golem, which was endowed with life with the help of a spell. A giant stone golem hits right under the feet of the main man, but he manages to dodge and wonder how to fight such an opponent. Daniel explains that the golem's bodies are so strong that an ordinary sword won't be able to penetrate them, so the hero needs to lubricate his weapon with acid. The young man is perplexed as to why the girl did not have a more effective method of dealing with her adversary. After the protagonist's companion thoroughly wipes her blade with strong acid, she offers the guy the use of her sword. The protagonist has no trouble catching his partner's weapon, which she kindly decided to lend him. The guy makes such a high jump that he reaches all the way to his opponent's head, since that's his only vulnerable spot. The protagonist plunges his blade precisely into the middle of the golem's stone head. The penetration of the acid-lubricated sword directly into the opponent's thought center results in a colossal blast of immense power. Having finished with the enemy, the protagonist gives his companion the weapon and informs her that it will be necessary to buy more of this useful acid. The girl claims to have made it herself. The protagonist's companion asks him to wait a bit, as she still needs to wipe her sword, or it will rust away. A young man picks up a stone from the floor, which is one of the many remains of a giant. He believes that the spell creates puppets rather than giving life. The protagonist and his partner descend the steps into a cave guarded by a stone golem. The girl smells a wonderful fragrance that comes from its depths. A scented trail leads the girl and the protagonist to an underground lair, equipped with an underground laboratory full of books, flasks, and other necessary items. While the protagonist is diligently searching for something on the bookshelves, his companion is content with the softness of a velvet plaid blanket. A character holds up a book titled Theory and Practical Application of the Teleportation Spell. The guy wonders if he read the inscription on the cover correctly. The girl states that the hero identified the title of the book quite correctly. In addition, he managed to read a rather specific word. The guy has a poor understanding of the structure of the local world, so he wonders what the essence of the teleportation spell is. Suddenly, a portal like the one described in the book opens right in front of the heroes. The girl warns the hero to be careful, as the people on the other side of the portal are not always friendly. A woman with a staff, who is the owner of the library, appears from the portal. She declares that no one will be friendly to anyone who breaks into their home. Talisa Maycumber uses a technique that releases lightning discharges from her staff. The protagonist at this time concludes that the girl used a spatial technique, but its radius of action is still unknown. The protagonist's companion interrupts his musings, stating that now is not the best time to be in the clouds. The guy immediately gets off the ground. The protagonist moves behind the back of the cave's mistress and seizes her weapon. The young man declares that it is not necessary to immediately rush at strangers who have entered the house. Being taken by surprise, the girl concludes that the hero also possesses a teleportation spell, but she does not understand how he was able to move without prior preparation. The young man states that it is rather difficult to explain, but it is definitely not a subject for discussion at the moment. The hero asks the girl to nod if she realizes that she doesn't want to be harmed. The girl, being a hostage of circumstances in every sense of the word, is forced to nod, thus agreeing with the hero. The protagonist's companion tells us that they were on the trail of a werewolf and ended up in this cave. The sorceress declares that she is no longer interested. The girl says that she would like to hear about the main character's teleportation spell most of all, as she has a lot of time. So she is ready to listen until the end. The protagonist and the sorceress talk about Taoism and scriptures despite being adversaries just a few minutes ago. The hero's companion gets angry. At noon, the protagonist and his new acquaintance were busy killing demonic creatures in the woods, while his companion grudgingly watched on. In the evening, the protagonist and the sorceress explored the forest and drew some mysterious drawings. Danielle, in turn, did not like the fact that the young man spent all his time with his new acquaintance. Toward nightfall, the adventurers decided to have a pre-sleepy snack sitting by the fire. The hero's companion, like a child, still felt the lack of attention from the hero's side. The sorceress claims she had no idea that the werewolf had dug a burrow right outside her sanctuary. The girl wonders if the protagonist is going to leave town when he's sorted out all his affairs. She states that she would like to know more stories from the guy's life. Suddenly, the girl snaps out of her seat and dashes toward the cave entrance without even saying for what purpose. Taking advantage of the moment of absence of the girl, the companion of the protagonist decides to let off all the steam that she has accumulated for the whole day. In relation to the young man, the sorceress brings out a sword and a scabbard for the protagonist as a presentation and wonders if the guy would like to be her Taoist partner on the path to immortality. The reaction of the protagonist to such a proposal did not last long. The guy almost choked on his food. His companion doesn't know what to say at all. Qiu Qian takes note of the beauty of the clothes the enchantress is wearing. Talisa is wearing a long purple dress with gold inserts. The girl assumes she looks exactly like she does in his stories. She wonders if the outfit suits her. The protagonist is forced to admit that the girl approached the choice of attire quite creatively. The enchantress reminds us that the main character only answered one question, while forgetting to give the answer to the most important question of all. Suddenly there is some sound above the heads of the travelers that comes from high above the trees. The sorceress girl asks the protagonist and his companion to behave quietly so as not to attract unnecessary attention. Suddenly a portal appears under the travelers' feet, into which they gradually begin to sink. The protagonist and his partner are pulled into a wormhole that appeared out of nowhere right in the air. However, both witches agree on what the girl is doing. Lastly, the sorceress throws a book into the closing portal, which lays out the principles of teleportation. The book will have to help the heroes get back out. The girl exhales calmly with a sense of accomplishment, as she managed to hide the protagonist and his partner in time before the arrival of the surprise guests. The enchantress looks up and discovers a woman floating above the treetops in a magical bubble above the ground. The woman who passed by and as if by chance descended from heaven turns out to be Tanika Fiore. She notes that their meeting is very fortunate. Tanika asks if the sorceress has seen two witches. The girl states that she hasn't heard anything about witches. She assumes they probably didn't come through here. The Ice Lady states that the Assembly of Mages is very concerned about them, so the sorceress may have to stay a couple more days. The woman warns that one of them might be from the Celestial Fusion. Talisa claims to have figured it all out, so as soon as she notices the witches, she'll let Mistress know right away. Tanika Fiore has to point out the gorgeous outfit of the enchantress, stating that the one made quite creatively. The girl doesn't find anything to say at first, then informs him that she was just working on some new spells. The Ice Lady doesn't believe the words of the sorceress, so once again she wonders what world this spell belongs to. Meanwhile, in another dimension, the protagonist confidently lands on the snowy ground. not realizing how he got here. Suddenly behind him, the young man hears a shout approaching from above, so he becomes slightly alarmed. Suddenly, his partner falls headfirst into a snowdrift near the protagonist. A girl sitting in a snowdrift shakes off the snow on her head and wonders why things have changed so quickly. Suddenly, a heavy spellbook falls on Danielle as well. Fighting off the girl's head, the girl finally kills the witch and falls a few meters away from her. The hero's companion falls face first into a snowdrift. The young man rushes to the heroine and asks if she is all right. The girl claims to feel normal, but she feels a little dizzy. The protagonist immediately notices the book, which was kindly shared by the sorceress. The guy opens the book and even his companion immediately manages to realize from the contents of a random page that the book isn't about werewolves at all. The protagonist closes the book and informs them that it seems their new friend had nothing to do with the incident with the prince. Suddenly, from behind the snow dunes appear mysterious creatures that look like snow people. The hero and his partner were not prepared for this, so they are forced to postpone thinking for a while. The hero, so as not to waste a second of the allotted time, immediately uses his blade. His weapon strikes one enemy after another, penetrating their furry huge bodies and flying through them. As the heroes manage to fight back a bit against the advancing enemies, the hero's companion indicates that she sees a house in the distance. The protagonist states that they need to hurry to get away from the snowfall. Daniel says that he knows these places. It never stops snowing there. In a veil of snow, the protagonist and his companion end up in a small wooden hut to wait out the blizzards. But as Danielle said earlier, snowfall in these parts never ends. The protagonist realizes that they ended up here thanks to a sorceress. Perhaps the girl wanted the heroes to die here from hypothermia. The hero's partner didn't see it that way. She saw Talisa opening the portals in a hurry, so it's not surprising that she didn't have enough time to set the correct teleportation coordinates. The protagonist lights up the room with a small flame that he lights right on the tip of his fingers. The young man wonders what exactly the girl meant by eternal snowfall. Danielle explains that they are in a place called the Green Mountains. The seasons used to be normal here, but during one of the winters it started snowing heavily, and it hasn't stopped until now. An old man who sits in the corner of the room with a drooping head declares that the culprit behind the terrible weather in the region is Shayna, as she is the one who cursed the place. The protagonist and his companion are very frightened, as they did not notice the stranger at all when they entered. They did not expect to see a man in such a place at all. The protagonist's companion wonders who this Shauna is and why she cursed the region. An elderly hooded man explains that Shauna is his wife who died decades ago. The elder tells us that he remembers that time very well. That year, as now, there was a bloody war going on everywhere. The man reports that the most powerful army then was that of the Northmen. They violently destroyed and pillaged everything in their path. In an elderly man's memoir, his friend warns him that the Northerners will soon come to their land, so he suggests that he travel to the south. Tara declares that his wife is pregnant, so she simply can't stand such a long journey, so he has to cancel the trip. A friend declares that the Northmen will kill their families and themselves. He says that the enemies like to put the heads of their victims on spears and compete to see who can collect the most. The man claims that he is powerless to change anything now, as he cannot jeopardize the life of Shauna and their unborn child. In such a case, the friend has no choice but to suggest that the man go to the witch, as she may be able to help him. The door to the room opens, and the shadow of the silhouettes of two young men falls on the floor. An elderly woman sitting at the table asks who has come in. A young couple asks an old woman from the doorstep to help them, as the Northmen will soon reach their village. Most of the inhabitants have left their homes, but the couple is unable to do so. The old woman feels sorry for the young people, but she agrees to help their family only on the condition that the price for this service will be appropriate. The man and his wife are incredibly happy that there is a person who can help in their seemingly hopeless situation. An old woman rolls out 2 purple pills from a vial, the false death pills. She explains that when the couple takes them, their bodies will hibernate for a full 24 hours. But they will feel everything that happens to them. The witch declares that the couple can see for themselves the effect of the pills when the Northerners come to the village. And the next day, when everyone has left, they will wake up. The man confronts the woman with the fact that while they are unconscious, the soldiers will ransack their home, as they will be unable to protect their belongings. The old lady claims that the young couple will no longer have anything that belongs to them, as that is the price they will have to pay. An elderly woman declares that their lives will henceforth be put on the line. She is forced to admit that people's wishes sometimes come at too high a price. The grandmother holds out purple pills to the young couple, which emit a trail into the air. The couple is still ambivalent about the witch's proposal, so they do not accept her offer. The old woman escorts the couple to the conclusion and declares that while they still have time to think about what they value more, their lives or their property, she warns them that in 2 days she too will leave the village. However, the man and his wife ended up trading all their possessions for these pills, as there is no point in any wealth if you are dead. When the Northmen reached their village, the young couple decided to take the pills to reincarnate as dead men for a while after all. The northern soldiers were clad in iron armor. The helmet showed an eye slit in the shape of a cross. On one of their shoulders was a mech. They were all armed with spears. The invaders searched and looted everything around them. The house of the man and his wife was no exception. The old man tells us that from the beginning the soldiers were greatly disappointed when they saw only 2 cold corpses lying on the straw. Danielle interrupts the older man's narration and states that it's no surprise since the witch took everything for herself. A moment later, however, the soldiers were no longer so dissatisfied, as all one of the motionless bodies turned out to be female. The protagonist realizes where the ending of this story is going, so he begins to get furiously angry, imagining himself in the shoes of this wife's husband. The elderly man does not want to remember such a negative experience, so he states that he would prefer to avoid the details of that night. The man claims that as soon as he felt the pills finish, he immediately rushed to his wife, but she was no longer breathing. The husband buried his wife, observing all traditions, on top of the mountain during the snowy weather she loved so much. However, he was never able to find the other half of the chest, which was most likely taken by those barbarians. Then the young man left the burial place. From that day on, it always snowed in the mountains. He knew it was all because of Shauna's resentment. The old man states that he will soon leave this world, so he would like to visit her grave and see Shauna for the last time. The elderly man has to admit that he can't get to that place on his own because it's full of monsters, so he's been locked up for a week now. The old man wonders if the hero and his companion are witches. If so, the old man asks them to escort him to the top for a fee. Danielle declares that the journey to the top of the mountain shouldn't take long. Besides, witches don't charge that much for their work. While the elderly man and the protagonist's companion leisurely make their way through the snowdrifts, the young man at this moment is fully laid out on the front line, clearing the way from the snow giants. Danielle remarks that it is such a pleasure to work with the main character, as she hasn't even used a sword in a long time. Qiu Qian guffaws that by his standards, he himself rarely holds a sword, which is due to his specific fighting style, so the girl can't do much fighting either. From under the snowdrift behind the old man and the girl bursts out a huge snow monster, which had previously lurked, and having calculated the time, decided to attack at the most inopportune moment. The protagonist did not expect such a development at all, as he thought he had cleaned up the area quite thoroughly. The snow monster deals a devastating blow to the protagonist's companion, but she successfully parries the attack of her opponent. With a sharp swing of her sword, the girl chops her opponent in 2 with her sharp blade. Danielle states that the fact that the protagonist missed his opponent is a big surprise. The girl claims that she has finally used her sword. The young man notices that his companion is quite noisy. The hero, however, is forced to admit that even his hovering blade's number of enemies is too high. While the guy was explaining the current balance of power to his partner, the dead man suddenly attacked the protagonist from behind. The protagonist uses the void step technique to shorten the distance between him and the enemy in an instant. Qiu Qian uses just 1 finger, which he uses to punch through his opponent while exerting tremendous force at that point. A powerful explosion rips the protagonist's enemy into insignificant pieces that fly in all directions. The hero notices that the higher they climb, the more monsters get in their way. The boy asks Danielle to stay close to the old man. As his presence is not his, it is easy to lose sight of him. Suddenly, the protagonist's partner blurts out that she's spotted someone in the distance near a tree. The protagonist comes closer to the tree and discovers the body of a man who is covered in snow. The young man is sure that the man is already dead. From the characteristic pendant that is common to members of the Tiger's faction, the hero concludes that the man belonged to her previously. Perhaps he was killed by monsters. The hero discovers some kind of notebook on the corpse of a man, but since he can't read, he asks his partner to read it to him. The girl picks up a notebook and tells him that it is the diary of a dead man. In it, he writes that the closer you get to the top, the more monsters you meet, and the more ferocious they become. The hero ironically states that this information was timely, but in all seriousness, they came to these conclusions without the help of what was written in the notebook. The young man continues to sneer, not understanding who could have said the fact that the opponent's strength had increased. And then he himself replies that it was him. The girl reports that the author of the diary also suggested what could have caused this situation. The hero, however, is not sure that it matters at all. Daniel states that according to a member of the Tigers faction, the monsters are simply protecting their king, who is on top of the mountain. The protagonist wonders if the local king will have demonic pills like he did in his world. The girl notices that the young man is again talking about some strange things she doesn't understand anything about. The old man wonders if he should forget about the journey to the top of the mountain, since it is dangerous even for such strong witches. At the most inopportune moment, the grandfather is attacked by a snow monster. The protagonist, of course, disposes of the enemy, but still complains that their elderly friend is so weak that the monsters do not even notice his presence. The young man declares that it is too late to worry about the journey becoming even more dangerous, as there is no turning back, as the snow monsters have already surrounded them. The hero claims that just as monsters protect their king, he and his partner will protect an old man on his way to his late wife's grave. The elderly man is very moved by the main character's words about how he and his partner are willing to give their lives for the old man and his goal. After uttering rather encouraging words, the protagonist and his companion surge forward, and in parallel, clear the way from the opponents. An elderly man asks them to wait for him. A group of witches and an elderly man move toward their goal, but along the way they encounter a cliff that leads to nowhere. The protagonist's partner declares that the battle with the snow monsters was much easier than she would have thought. The young man asks the girl not to relax early, as they have not yet seen the so-called queen. Suddenly, the young men turn their attention to some wooden object that is buried in a snowdrift. An elderly man can't believe his eyes as the grave of his late wife appears before his eyes. The elder moves slowly through the deep snowdrifts toward Shauna's burial site. From beneath the wooden cross, you can see eyes glowing blue in the darkness. Suddenly, a small demonic creature with icy growths on its hands and blonde hair on its head crawls out of the impenetrable void. Suddenly, the main character grabs the infant by the throat, squeezing it tightly so that it doesn't break free and run away anywhere. The small child is quite light in his own way, so the protagonist has no trouble holding the boy down, especially given his iron grip. The old man assumes the creature is his and Shanna's child. The protagonist liquefies the throat of the demonic child so hard, something clearly makes the child uncomfortable. Therefore, he starts squealing. The protagonist, realizing that he is hurting the baby, decides to loosen his grip, thus allowing the baby to free himself. A demonic creature that no longer has much in common with humans begins to become enraged and covered in ice spikes. The elderly man states that there is no doubt that the boy is his son, as he resembles his late wife like 2 drops of water. The old man, despite the fact that his son does not make a man of himself as such, still dares to embrace his offspring as a sign of acceptance. Demon, of course, does not like this treatment, because he does not have those qualities that are inherent in the average person, so he begins to break free from his father's embrace. However, after a number of unsuccessful attempts to break free, the boy still dies and accepts his father's care and affection. The main character's partner has tears coming out slightly from such a touching moment, so she wipes her eyes. Danielle notes that this is a very heartwarming moment. The elderly father and his young son are in each other's arms, and the old man is flooded with tears of happiness at being reunited with his family. She declares that she misses her late wife very much. The protagonist and his partner, without unnecessary words, exchange glances, because without them it becomes clear that they have successfully managed to fulfill the will of the old man, so they can feel really happy. Along with this, the nighttime haze is replaced by morning sunshine, and a powerful blizzard is replaced by a light snowfall. The protagonist and his partner waste no time, so after helping an elderly man with reuniting with his family, they continue their journey onward. Danielle declares, "Something the fact that an old man in his old age still managed to know paternal happiness is so sweet." The sound of a massive body rapidly approaching reaches Qiu Qian, so he immediately turns around. However, the protagonist, unlike his partner, does not even think of losing vigilance, as there are still monsters that they have not killed. Danielle notes that the elderly man and his young son could be in danger as they make their way down the mountain. The protagonist assures the girl that the subordinates will not touch their own king. He cannot believe that the monsters do not realize that their king has finally found peace and quiet. The girl reminds that the theory about the existence of the king is still just a theory, and moreover not confirmed, just a guess of one witch doctor. The hero declares that the situation is not encouraging in any case, so they should head back out. The protagonist and his companion go back, along the way encountering previously killed snow monsters, whose corpses lie here and there. The witches finally descend below and arrive again at the grave of the elderly man's wife, but find only a child sitting on it. The protagonist is perplexed as to where the old man could have gone. It is not surprising that it will be difficult to find him now, because it is so hard to feel the man's presence. The young man calls out to the elderly man at the top of his voice, but there is no response. Danielle suddenly points her finger in the other direction, demanding that the protagonist turn his attention to her. Right on top of the wooden cross of his mother's grave, a demonic child climbed up, yelling something while holding half of an old man's leg in his hands. The protagonist is horrified by what he sees when he comes to the realization that the bloodthirsty child has left nothing but a leg from his father. In a fit of rage, the protagonist immediately uses the soaring blade technique to avenge an elderly man. The little demoness's villainous face is abruptly replaced by an emotion of not understanding. Suddenly Danielle, in order to protect the child, appears in front of the main character's blade, which was intended not at all for her. The young man is puzzled why his partner did such a reckless at first sight act. He claims that if it were not for the training, the girl could have shattered all her bones. Danielle still manages to wake up from such a powerful attack. The girl reports that a few bones may not have been able to withstand the impact after all. The girl explains that she only did so because she believes that the old man would not want his child dead despite being a monster. The protagonist demands that his partner stop talking immediately, as it can only worsen her condition. The girl asks that the young man first promise that he will not kill this child. The boy declares that he will keep his promise only to save the girl. The protagonist gives his companion a small red pill that is supposed to help the girl recover from her many injuries. The demon child, meanwhile, is jubilant because he was able to do something that brought him immense pleasure. The protagonist angrily orders the little brat from hell to immediately stop being so dismissive of the one who saved his life. Daniel can barely speak and cannot walk, however states that it would be a good idea to bury the elderly man. The protagonist states that they cannot save absolutely everyone, as they are simply witches who work for a bounty. Qiu Qian carries his partner on his back, exerting all his strength to overcome the harsh climatic conditions of the region. The girl breathes heavily and speaks, letting them know that a little more and they will finally be able to leave the snowy area. The protagonist continues to carry Danielle on his back, but looks back to examine something. It turns out that the young man had secretly used the soaring blade technique from his partner, launching a sword towards the old man's grave. The protagonist's blade comes closer and closer to the infant, who stands disdainfully right on his late parent's grave. In the end, the sword reaches its goal and strikes the demonic child in the back. In doing so, the hero avenged his friend by breaking his pact with her. The snowfall gradually stops. The clouds part and sunlight begins to break through them. The snow and ice cover also gradually comes to naught. The protagonist apologizes to his companion to himself, so as not to wake the girl, for not keeping his promise. Danielle suddenly awakens and grabs the protagonist by the shoulder, thus letting him know that she is conscious. The young man is slightly startled. The girl points to someone's houses, which are in the distance. The hero's companion offers to stay there for a while. After a while, the witches manage to descend the mountain, and they find themselves at its foot. There's a small town. The girl removes a gold brooch from her clothes and asks the protagonist to keep it for a while. The young man wonders why this is necessary. Daniel betrays the boy with a badge in the shape of a wolf's head, explaining that no one will want to take in travelers who are witches. The protagonist prudently knocks on the wooden door of one of the buildings. The door opens and a young man appears on the threshold, immediately inquiring what he can do for the travelers who have arrived. The protagonist explains that they had an accident on the way, so the girl needs a place to rest for a while. The young man asks to let them in, informing them that they will pay. A man wonders what happened to the girl. The protagonist replies that his partner has fractures of several bones. The stranger declares that in such a case, the guy will need to carefully take care of the girl. The man wonders if the heroes have come from the land of eternal winter. Qiu Qian in turn wondered how the man knew that he and Danielle had come from that particular place. The owner of the house states that such incidents are not uncommon for their settlement, so he allows the hero to enter, and in addition, not to pay money. The protagonist and the other people in the house look at each other suspiciously. A guy puts a girl on the bed. The landlord admits that his conditions are not first class, but the heroes can rest assured that they can have everything that is available here. One thing the man forbids them to do, however, is to go into the backyard. The main character wonders what's in the backyard that they're not allowed to go there. The owner of the manor irritably argues that travelers have no need to know what is there. The young man apologizes for his tactless question and declares that he will not pry again. Meanwhile, as evening falls in the backyard of the homestead, the sun is already slowly setting over the horizon. The owner of the house opens the huge lock on the wooden door with a key, and it makes a distinctive clicking sound. A man walks down the steps into a basement room, illuminating it with a lamp. He assumes that the person he is descending to has already missed him. The bright light of a candle lamp illuminates a demonic creature. It looks like a girl, but it has numerous mushroom growths on its head.